Have you ever wondered why humans speak over 7,000 different languages when it would be so much easier if everyone spoke the same language? According to the Bible, there was actually a time when all of humanity spoke one single language and understood each other perfectly. But then something happened at a place called Babel that changed human communication forever. This ancient story doesn't just explain why we have different languages, but it reveals something profound about human nature and divine judgment, and the purpose behind our diversity. Let me take you back to a time shortly after the Great Flood when Noah and his family had repopulated the earth. Genesis chapter 11 verse 1 sets the scene with a simple but powerful statement. And now the whole world had one language and a common speech. Imagine what that would have been like. Everyone everywhere could understand each other perfectly. There were no translation barriers and no miscommunication because of language differences, and no cultural divisions based on different ways of speaking. The descendants of Noah traveled together and moved eastward until they found a plain in the land of Shinar, which is the ancient name for Mesopotamia, in what is now modern-day Iraq. This was a fertile region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where some of the world's earliest civilizations developed. The people decided to settle there instead of continuing to spread out across the earth like God had commanded them to do after the flood. Genesis 11 verse 3 tells us what they decided to build. They said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. This detail is actually historically accurate because in Mesopotamia, where stone was scarce, ancient builders did use baked bricks and bitumen, which is a naturally occurring tar-like substance. The Bible's description matches what archaeologists have found in that region. But the people weren't just building houses or simple structures. Verse 4 reveals their ambitious plan. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." This statement reveals everything about their motivation and their goals and their rebellion against God. Most people think the sin of Babel was just about building a tall tower, but the real problem was much deeper than that. Let me break down what was actually wrong with what these people were doing. First, they wanted to make a name for themselves. This phrase in Hebrew carries the idea of establishing their own glory and reputation and fame independent of God. They wanted to be remembered and celebrated for their own achievements without acknowledging God as their creator and provider. Second, they explicitly said they didn't want to be scattered over the face of the earth. But back in Genesis chapter 9 verse 1, after the flood, God had commanded Noah and his sons to be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. God wanted humanity to spread out and populate the entire world. By staying together in one place and building a city, the people at Babel were directly disobeying God's command. Third, they wanted to build a tower that reached to the heavens. This wasn't just about architectural ambition, but it was about trying to reach God's realm through their own efforts. In the ancient world, towers like this, called ziggurats, were built as temples and stairways to the gods. The people at Babel were trying to access the divine realm on their own terms, without submitting to God's authority or following his ways. The heart of the sin at Babel was pride and self-sufficiency and rebellion. The people thought they could create their own security and make their own legacy and reach heaven through their own power. They didn't want to depend on God or obey God or spread out across the earth as God commanded. They wanted to stay together and build something that would make them great in their own eyes. Genesis 11 verses 5 through 7 describe what happened next. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." Notice that God says, "Let us," which many biblical scholars see as a reference to the Trinity, with God the Father and God the Son and God the Holy Spirit. God's statement is really important. He says that because humanity was united in language and purpose, nothing they planned would be impossible for them. This sounds like a compliment, but it was actually a warning. United humanity without God at the center would be capable of incredible evil and destruction and rebellion. We see this proven throughout history. When humans unite around the wrong purposes, the results are always catastrophic. So God confused their language. The Hebrew word used here is balal, which means to mix up or confuse or jumble. This is where the name Babel comes from. In Hebrew, Babel sounds like the word for confusion. But interestingly, the Babylonians themselves called their city Bab-Ili, which means gate of God. So there's irony here, and the place that was supposed to be a gateway to the divine realm became instead a place of confusion and division. Verse 8 tells us the result, and so the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. God accomplished exactly what he had commanded them to do in the first place. By confusing their languages, he forced them to separate into different groups and spread out across the world. What they refused to do willingly, they were forced to do through divine intervention. The Bible doesn't give us the details of exactly how God confused the languages. Did it happen instantly overnight, or was it a gradual process? Did people wake up one morning suddenly speaking different languages, or did their speech slowly change over time? The text suggests it was a supernatural event that happened relatively quickly, because it says the people could not understand each other and had to stop building. Imagine the chaos and confusion that must have followed. Families would have been divided as different members began speaking different languages. Work crews couldn't coordinate anymore because the workers couldn't understand their supervisors. Trade and commerce would have collapsed because merchants couldn't negotiate. The unified society fell apart because the one thing holding it together, which was common language, was suddenly taken away. The people naturally would have grouped together with others who spoke the same language. These language groups would have formed the basis for different nations and cultures and ethnic groups. As they scattered across the earth, each group developed their own customs and traditions and ways of life, shaped by the environments they settled in and the languages they spoke. Modern linguistics actually supports the idea that language is diversified from common roots. Language families like Indo-European and Semitic and Sino-Tibetan show that groups of languages are related and descended from common ancestors. While linguists debate whether all languages came from a single proto-language, the pattern of diversification matches what the Bible describes at Babel. Understanding why God confused the languages helps us see that this wasn't just punishment, but it was actually an act of mercy and wisdom. If humanity had remained united in rebellion against God with all their resources focused on self-glorification, the results would have been disastrous. A unified humanity without God at the center would have developed incredible technology and power, but used it for increasingly evil purposes. God's intervention at Babel limited humanity's ability to organize large-scale rebellion against him. By dividing people into different language groups and forcing them to scatter, God prevented the concentration of human power and pride in one place. This doesn't mean God is against human achievement or cooperation, but he's against human achievement that excludes him, and cooperation that serves prideful rebellion. The confusion of languages also preserved humanity from self-destruction. Throughout history, we've seen what happens when humans unite around evil ideologies. The 20th century alone gave us examples like Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia, and other totalitarian regimes that caused unimaginable suffering. The diversity of languages and cultures acts as a natural brake on the spread of evil ideologies, because they can't easily spread across language barriers. But there's another reason God scattered humanity. He wanted people to fill the earth and explore it and develop it and care for it. By forcing people to spread out, God ensured that every part of the earth would be inhabited and cultivated. Different groups in different environments would develop different skills and knowledge and perspectives. This diversity would ultimately enrich humanity, even though it made communication harder. Today we live in a world of incredible linguistic and cultural diversity, with over 7,000 languages and countless cultural traditions. This diversity can seem like an obstacle to communication and unity, but the story of Babel reminds us that it's also a protection and a gift. Our different languages preserve us from totalitarian control and enrich human experience, and reflect the creativity of a God who speaks to all people in all cultures. The challenge isn't to eliminate diversity, but to find unity in the midst of it, and centered on God rather than on human pride and achievement.